The 80s had the General. The 90s had John Gilligan. In the noughties, it was the reign of Martin Marlowe Hyland. His was a familiar path with success and power, and then the recklessness. He had to go, because with him, an innocent young man doing an honest day's work died. Crime World presents Caught in the Crossfire, the unsolved murders of coke kingpin Marlowe Hyland and innocent Anthony Campbell. Available now on all podcast platforms. No, I have to be honest with you.
Yeah.
If you presented me with a bunch of flowers, I'd be straight up to HR.
Yeah.
To complain you.
Yeah.
I would find it weird.
But there is a context now to that, which was, it was said, it is your birthday. We won't get into
it. Isn't today. It was yesterday.
Yeah. And I did say happy birthday to you on the phone.
Yeah, and I was cool with that.
You weren't that great. You went, yeah.
Yeah, well, it was a big one. I didn't really want to discuss it.
I was confronted by a colleague who said to me, what have you got Nicola for her birthday? I said, I'm not getting her something for her birthday. Can you imagine how awkward that would be?
It would be really awkward. Isn't that funny?
I'd be tempted now to get you something just
don't,
to see the awkwardness.
Ruin everything. Imagine it ruined everything.
Okay. There was no way back. What about one of those teddy bears with a big happy birthday sign or something?
Never, ever come back into the podcast again. Because you had fucked it all up.
It fucked up our emotionally stunted
relationship.
Yeah.
No, it was, it was a, you'll get there someday yourself. Like, you're like so much younger than me now, just
I'm
at this
significantly
moment in
younger.
time.
Significantly.
But you'll catch up.
I'll catch up.
Let's just say I got a load of cards and messages and everything saying, welcome to the club. So
yes.
You can guess what it is. Or a roundy one. Isn't that what they call it?
It's a big one.
Yeah. So I'm 30.
And you're
finally made it.
Yeah, and your flowers and your bottles and all are in the post.
Literally. And I identify as 26 at the age. I've never actually left that point. Is there a moment, is there an age you identify as? You're allowed to identify as anything these days. Ducks, cats, anything. So I'm going to say I identify as 26.
I don't know. Do you feel like a proper adult yet?
No.
No.
I really don't feel like a proper adult.
No, neither do
and
I.
you know what? I look at people and I think they're so much older than me and they're not. And it's not just age. I feel they're so much more mature than me.
Yeah.
It's like they could give out to me and I'd accept it because they're just that bit, I don't know. Yeah, more mature.
Well, I mean, I know as I said before, I've kids, teenage kids, young in the early teens, and I definitely relate to them. On an emotional level, better than I do to most people my age.
Have you total Arrested Development? Because I'm not that bad.
No, I think I can relate, but I can understand them instinctively.
I've at least made it to my 20s.
No, I think I got stuck in the teenage years.
Did you?
And of course, obviously, I kept the looks of a teenager as well. So
yeah, of course.
But anyway, so your gift, I didn't.
No, don't.
Land.
No, don't. Because, I mean, you don't want them to open a file up in HR about
no, not particularly, no.
creepy behaviour or something.
No. It's great, isn't it? We're both happy with things as they are, aren't they?
My colleague, yeah. And Nicola, why exactly did you phone us? So weird.
Yeah, because she did say, did you could get her a bottle or something. I was thinking, was it perfume now or no?
And what did she mean?
I think a bottle of alcohol, yeah.
But then you'd be pushing drink on me.
I know.
Yeah.
I know. And what?
You
go home and think, what did he mean by that?
You could go home and think, what is she going to do with that? She drinks it all at the same time or something like that.
So we just keep it at the level we're at.
Keep it the level we're at. We're all good and everyone's good with it. So that's grand. Anyway, moving swiftly on, because while I did take yesterday off, we're back to work today.
Yeah.
And a couple of things we want to catch up on. I got a message the other night that a nephew of Jerry the Monk Hutch had died sort of alone in his North Inner City home, and that he maybe was there some time before he was discovered. And of course it was Eddie Hutch Jr. Now, Eddie Hutch Jr. was a regular figure around these parts of Dublin where we work, around Talbot Street. He lived just around the corner in the North Inner City. I think he was Eddie Hutch Sr.'s eldest son. And of course, Eddie Hutch Sr. was brutally murdered days after the Regency on the doorstep of that house in Poplar Row. But he cast a kind of a unfortunate character, I thought, always, whenever you'd see him. He's somebody who's obviously been in the grip of some addictions during his life, and
I mean, actually,
troubled looking guy.
Yeah, I mean, I think when the feud actually kicked off, there was I remember a few articles saying, who are the Hutch's families, and Eddie Hutch Jr. was even being put forward as a serious criminal. And of course, he had like a phenomenal amount of convictions, something like 180 convictions. And even as he died, he was before the courts. But really, these are all for the most part, minor sort of crimes. I mean, he'd suffered as a result of drug addiction very, very heavily. He'd suffered from mental illness that had been part of his court cases, and I'd say he was more a tragic figure than anything else. I mean, I think he'd really had an impact in terms of his health, in terms of, at some point they discussed he'd suffer from hallucinations and that type of illness. So you would see him around. Actually, just saw him last week, believe it or not.
Did you?
Yeah. I did. I saw him up as I was driving home up near Ballybock. He had a long beard at some stages, but I think he actually was more clean shaven then. And he'd sort of stop and talk to people a lot. I mean, he did do a couple of interviews actually about the feud at time. Yeah. And I mean, he was at this stage, he was more a danger to himself than other people, I would say. He kind of became, if you remember back in 2015, he was due to appear on Winning Streak. Do you remember this?
I do.
Yeah. And I don't know if it came out in advance that he was due to appear. It must have done.
His cousin Gary had been shot dead in Spain at this point, and there was sort of rumblings of a feud, of danger in the air between the Hutch and the Kinahan factions.
Yeah, and I don't know, it must have been that people knew in advance that he was due to come on. But it was flagged in advance that he was coming on, and there was a bit of a fuss. And then I think there was even a couple of politicians saying they shouldn't have criminals winning streak or whatever.
Yeah.
And he didn't go on in the end. His brother Ross went on, and I think they won 30 grand, and Ross gave a punch to the camera and a couple of cheeky smiles. But at that stage, even back in 2015, I think the reason Eddie didn't go on is that he wouldn't have been capable of handling that situation. Not because he would have become violent or volatile. He just wasn't, he just didn't have the capacity to deal with those circumstances.
I suppose, on TV and be interviewed and that kind of thing.
And he had a huge amount of trauma in his life, and a lot of that connected with the effects of criminality, if you can broadly consider that, both before that point and after. His brother, Christopher Bouncer Hutch, his younger brother died in, I think it was 2005. Now, Bouncer Hutch was the only one of Eddie's sons to really become heavily linked and involved in the Kinahan gang. He was quite a significant person in that organisation. He died as a result of, non-suspicious circumstances. And he was the first, I think, to go. But drug use was certainly a factor. At the time, his mother was not happy with the findings of the inquest and had claimed that he may have been poisoned. She did interviews in the aftermath saying they never tested for rat poison, and she believed that he was the victim of some sort of murder plot, I suppose, but I don't think there was any evidence.
Now, with Christopher Bouncer Hutch being the kind of the link originally, because he would have been a friend of Daniel Kinahan, personal friend of his, probably outside of criminality. Would he have been the link that drew Gary Hutch in, and was the introduction into that, or were they both kind of working hand in glove?
I think they were both working hand in glove and came from that sort of broad organisation that existed in the North Inner City, that Daniel Kinahan had ties back to their very early 20s and even teenage years, and he was part of that original set, including people like Ross Browning and Gary Finnegan, those kind of original crew that some of who have stuck with Daniel all the way. Now, obviously, Eddie's other brothers, Alan and Ross, are both currently serving sentences for violent crimes. They've both been heavily involved in criminality, mostly of a chaotic kind, really all their adult lives, and have spent a significant portion of their adult lives in prison. Ross got a 10-year sentence last year, I think, for an attack on an ex-girlfriend and another man. very violent incidents in which somebody was slashed with a knife. Alan Hutch was just back in the Sunday World just last month. He's up again for a robbery offence occurred on Talbot Street just right outside. He has a number of convictions, including, I think it was a conviction where he served a very lengthy sentence for an attack on 3 Gardaí. So that's Eddie's 2 other brothers. His own mother died as well last year in 2023. And his father, Eddie Hutch, of course, would have been, was shot dead as part of the feud.
And like Eddie Hutch Sr., I think would have been described as a bit of a stroker.
Yeah.
He was, these were the second we're talking about, Eddie Hutch Jr., Ross, Alan, Gary, etc. They're the second generation Hutch that is known to the public.
Yeah.
The original sort of their fathers, Eddie Hutch Sr., Johnny Hutch, who was another brother.
Del Boy Sr. as well.
Obviously Jerry Hutch himself, the monk, and Patsy Hutch. They all sort of came from a large family, and Jerry Hutch, the most notorious or famous rather of them all, and seen as sort of the godfather of the family, he would have really modelled himself on being anti-drugs, having an anti-drug stance. Of course, we know that he was engaging, liaising, working with and around paramilitaries, and obviously that narrative would have settled very well with them. But the second generation, despite the kind of work that went into putting out that narrative that the Hutches hated drugs and, they'd seen the devastation of it, by the second generation, by the time you come to Gary and Bouncer and others around them, you realise they are totally and utterly embedded in the sale of drugs. They're very high up the Kinahan organisation. Gary Hutch is listed nearly as number 2, 3 in that organisation under Daniel Kinahan, and Bouncer, until his death, was also very significant in it. So there's a total turnaround, isn't there?
Yes,
certainly
there is.
What we believe. And
there's also then the other wave of Hutch relatives who, like Alan and like Eddie Jr., who become involved in criminality, but is really of the chaotic type that's feeding their addiction. I mean, Eddie Hutch, I do remember seeing Eddie Hutch Jr. and somebody saying, "Oh, would he not be shot?" And again, they were saying, nobody's going to shoot him. And of course, because Eddie's mother, Jane, also known as Jenny, like she, along with Eddie Sr., would have been pally with Christopher Kinahan Sr. Back in the day. They would have been friends. She would have told people at certain stages that even after the feud kicked off, that she had rang up Christy Kinahan Sr. and he'd said, no, I'm not going to go near any of your sons, which in fairness didn't seem to happen. But Eddie would have known Christy, unlike Jerry, and that would have been, as the feuds began, there is a belief that there was contact there between Eddie and Christy Sr. to try and resolve things. And obviously that didn't happen, and Gary Hutch got shot, Yeah, I mean, Eddie Jr. was walking up and down Talbot Street at the height of the feud, sort of in the aftermath of February 2016. You probably knew that he was doing so because he needed to get whatever he needed to feed his addiction, that he was, very open, obvious, easy target if anybody did want to go for him. And no doubt they considered it, because they considered a lot of other easy targets as well. But there was this sense of, please try and look after yourself. But he didn't have the capabilities to look after himself. I think Ross as well was in and out of the shops around here at the time. And, very open and out and about. There was a chaoticness to their life. It's so interesting, the Hutch family, and they're a huge family, by the way, and there's loads of Hutch family members who have no involvement in either criminality or addiction, who are working hard and whatever. But actually that sort of immediate Hutch family from Jerry down, they tell the story, that family nearly tells the story of the North Inner City and what has happened, and that, I suppose, claw for wealth to bring themselves out of those slum and tenement conditions that they were born into, and how it has affected the next generation. Some of them have been taken out of it completely, probably being educated and are working in the legitimate economy, will never look back. But others didn't have the ability to remove themselves from the poverty and the cycle, of that. Yeah, I mean, I think in the case of Alan Hutch, Eddie Jr.'s younger brother, like he's spoken about he hasn't spoken. His defence solicitor has spoken, even in recent times in the court cases, and he's been up and down constantly. She's spoken about the trauma of his upbringing, the violence he witnessed in his home, the effects of carrying the surname Hutch is even been mentioned, and how he feels that's a target on his back. But I think you can see the effects of drug addiction on the lives of people like Eddie Jr. and Alan Hutch and other members of the family who've really, become drug users as teenagers and really never recovered to live a normal life. And of course, there's many, many members of the Hutch family who haven't had that fate, but have managed to go on and live very normal lives. And it's tragic, really, when you think about it. If you go back to when Jerry and Eddie were growing up, the level of poverty in the North Inner City was significant. Jerry became involved, and you've done podcasts about in that kind of first wave of criminality, really, as teenagers. And, they were locked up at very early ages. And, all of that sort of intergenerational trauma has been transmitted down. And some people have managed to rise above it, but some people like Eddie Jr. simply never did. I'm sure if you go back, of those 180 convictions, there are convictions that involve violence, and there be victims of that. Yeah. And they may suggest that we're speaking too softly about him if they've suffered at the hands of that. But, he certainly is a victim of his circumstances as well.
There's been an awful lot of death in the Hutch family in the last 10 years.
Yeah, because we haven't even mentioned other relatives like Garrett Hutch, who was shot dead in Avondale House. I think that was 2016 as well? Obviously, Gary Hutch, that we have spoken about, shot dead in Spain.
So Gareth Hutch would have been the son of Johnny Hutch.
Son of Johnny Hutch. There's Derek Coakley Hutch.
Gary Hutch was the son of Patsy Hutch.
Yes.
Derek Coakley Hutch was the son of a sister?
No, he was the son of Del Boy Sr.
Of Del Boy Sr., who died years ago.
Died many years ago. And he would have maybe been the closest to Jerry at one point. So that's just as part of that feud alone. There's those three, and then there's Johnny Hutch, who died in tragic circumstances as well, Johnny Hutch Sr.
Johnny Hutch fell down a stairs in his home, but he survived an assassination attempt at his home, which was witnessed by his daughter.
Yes.
And came in the aftermath of an assassination attempt on his other son, Jonathan, who managed to run for cover in Mallorca while an innocent man, Trevor O'Neill, was shot dead.
Absolutely. So, I mean, it's that level of just that level of destruction. If you look back on that over a 10-year period, we've listed all of those people who've died in a mixture of tragic circumstances. It is, it's hard to even imagine the impact of that on a lot of people,
Mm-hmm. So there was a time when the upcoming funeral of Eddie Hutch Jr. would have resulted in an absolute flood of security around the city. It would be seen as a
possible point of attack,
target. It'll be a regularly controlled situation this time around, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't think that
threat level has abated.
Is abated, and whether there's an agreement not to whether people are biding their time, or there's some sort of understanding, or even an absolute agreement. It's not fully clear, but certainly there's a lot of people that are from both sides that are visible in the city as you walk around.
So will his funeral be covered as a story? I mean,
well, possibly.
Just out of interest, I'm just.
Well, I mean, I actually
as a point of view, because I'm just in the past few years, if somebody. It was almost seen as an event to cover because it was in the public interest, because of the security blanket that was around it, the fact that it was a kind of an event that could have seen gangland activity or whatever. But now, standing back from it, will it be? It probably will be, will it?
Well, I think it would be within reason, but it'd be nothing that the newspapers would be, like where they would feel that they absolutely cannot miss something like that. Like Eddie, if I suppose whether Jared Hutch is back in the country or not will
whether
become...
Jerry Hutch attends would be the main kind of focus point of the thing. And I mean, he has been in and out. Like he has definitely been in and out. I think he's spending most of his time in Lanzarote. Why wouldn't you? With the constantly up and down weather in this country. But, it probably gets a little bit hot there now over the summer. So he has been in and out. But it's his presence in the city still can turn ahead.
Absolutely. I mean, there's a never-ending fascination, So I suppose it becomes a kind of a soap opera in a way, doesn't it?
On the spot, Riley, asking you that. I was just wondering.
No. It's interesting because I suppose if you remember back to the funeral of Eddie Hutch Sr., there was very elaborate measures put in place by the Gardaí to ensure it was protected. They were in discussions with the media. I think at the time there was an email sent around saying we'll in order to make sure that it was policed properly, that there would be a place set aside for the media so they're not, photographers aren't hiding and the guards aren't getting security worries thinking this is a hitman. So there was all of these things going on, and newspapers would ensure maybe to get a couple of photographers there. No, I mean, those days are gone, and that's a good thing. But yeah, I mean, look.
Time moves on and these things do abate, even though there will always be still there. There's always going to be animosity between the Hutch and the Kinahan clans, as they were called in the Special Criminal Court. But I suppose that risk, and touch wood, even feel nervous talking about that, but that risk on the street in that sort of broad daylight, constant risk seems to have somewhat abated. Okay, well, R.I.P. Eddie Hutch Jr.
Exactly. Thanks, Nicola.
I'm Nicola Tallant, and you're watching Crime World, a podcast about criminals, drugs, and the underworld in Ireland and across the globe. Make sure you subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you can be the first to watch all our latest episodes. You can also listen wherever you get your podcasts.